Perhaps the biggest media firestorm of the Trump presidency began as soon as he said these words in Helsinki in response to an AP reporter's question.
My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe?
Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
The next day, in what the press dubbed a do-over, Trump tried to clarify his remarks.
I came back and I said, what is going on? What's the big deal? So I got a transcript, I reviewed it. In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't or why it wouldn't be Russia.
And most of the media reaction ranged from skepticism to outright mockery.
How stupid does Trump think we Americans are? The president's excuse for his embarrassing press conference, where he sided with Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence chiefs, does not add up.
Guys, this is one of those times when the president's denial about what he said all but confirms what he said.
So that's the hostage tape. The president buckled to criticism. I know what they're saying. That's exactly what happened. He buckled. And that happens. This is politics, after all.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage here in New York, Liz Claman of Fox Business, the host of Countdown to the Closing Bell. Kat Timpf, a National Review writer and Fox News contributor. And Jessica Tarlov, research director at Bustle.com and also a Fox News contributor. Liz, let's start with this media explosion over Helsinki. It was perhaps the most intense level of moral condemnation I've seen since Charlottesville, perhaps in his whole presidency. Do you think it's been fair?
I have to say that initially, when you looked at all of the attacks, it was a real pile-on. But from every side, Howard, you even showed some of the Fox News journalists here and some of the pundits here. And when you've got the friendlies, so-called the friendlies, because, you know, each network takes a different perspective on things. And that's always been the case, even well before President Trump. When you see that the Fox News journalists were almost to a person coming out and condemning or at least criticizing how the president had handled this, you've got to ask yourself, you know, the president calls the other side fake media. Are we now the fake news media? You know, it just did not strike a positive chord, especially considering what happened.
That was exactly the question I was going to ask you, because you not only had many people at Fox, putting that aside for a moment, Wall Street Journal editorial page, a personal and national embarrassment. Weekly Standard said Congress had censured the president. So it becomes harder for the president, as he often does, to paint this as the liberal media run amok.
Right, absolutely. And oftentimes, whatever the president does, there's certain people who will stand behind him. We had Newt Gingrich coming out and saying that that this was the worst day of his presidency.
Most serious mistake.
Most serious mistake of his presidency. But yeah, everybody was kind of in agreement on this issue. But the president still blamed it on the fake news media, which I thought was very interesting. As you said, what, are we fake news media now? But I think that it was just a bad day. There was really no way to spin it any other way. The publicity was not good, and how could it have been?
At the same time, Jessica, do you think that some of the liberal criticism went just a bit too far? We saw on MSNBC Jill Wine-Banks comparing this to 9/11, to Pearl Harbor, to Kristallnacht. Charles Blow, New York Times columnist, declared Trump to be a traitor even before the press conference, as soon as he got to Helsinki.
Well, traitor's been thrown around since President Trump has assumed office, and you have people even
but
like
really
John
this
Brennan.
Week.
No, really this week. It is a lot to stomach to see him standing there next to Vladimir Putin, who we know is a murderous thug dictator, and not only say, I'm not sure what he did, but, you know, equivocate on everything and give him far more credit than he's due, and kind of make him seem like the big guy in the room. Like, we're the big dogs in the room here. We're, the exceptional nation.
I get that you're critical, but do treason and traitor go too far? It was a botched press conference.
Well, there are definitions of these things. I think it is more than a botched press conference, but this is part of the issue that we have when we talk about impeachment as well. You can't just throw that around without grounds for it. Like, what are you going to impeach him on? What are the reasons to call him a traitor? And we have definitions of those. So, yes, I think that we go too far. But as Liz and Kat have pointed out here, this is both sides of the aisle. Everyone is ashamed of this.
The whole thing that was stacked against President Trump from the get-go, the deck was stacked against him. But he was the dealer. I think that was the problem. 2-hour closed-door meeting. That was by his choice. No aides present. And then suddenly pictures surface of Melania Trump, the First Lady, and President Trump greeting Vladimir Putin because the Russian pool somehow got pictures of that greeting. So if I'm an American president, I'm going to look and say, well, who are these guys? Where are my guys?
Well, at one point,
that didn't seem to be the narrative that we got of him sticking up for the American side.
I still think that treason went a lot too far, and I think that when people hear words like treason in the media, a lot of people who are on President Trump's side are less likely to listen to any of it.
Right, it turns them off. And look, at one point, the president said, why didn't you cover the meeting? Because the American side wasn't giving out any information about the closed-door meeting. But when he did the clarification, reading from his script, people said things like hostage tape. Why can't the president say he misspoke without all of this, oh, he didn't really mean it, he wasn't being sincere?
I think it's because he waited so long to do it. If after all the firestorm came out, he immediately said,
hours.
I meant to say wouldn't, I didn't mean to say would. He gave 2 interviews on this channel, and he did not mention that clarification once. So I think if he had done that then, I think people might have been more likely to believe him. But it seemed like it was kind of a last-ditch effort when he saw that people, even on his own side, were speaking out against him.
Let me ask you about Dan Cohen, the director of national intelligence, because it was an extraordinary spectacle of him being interviewed by NBC's Andrea Mitchell in Aspen, learning while the cameras were rolling that the president, without bothering to tell his DNI, had invited Putin to Washington this fall. And then he had some sort of carefully couched criticism. Take a look.
How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. If he had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way, but that's not my role.
Then you have certain administration officials telling the Washington Post Coates had gone rogue. Does this fuel the media narrative that this president doesn't necessarily consult his top national security advisors?
Of course it does, but that's because it's true. And you can't get a more honest moment than him hearing that in front of everyone and saying, I'm sorry, what? Which I think is what all of us were thinking, especially with the midterm election coming up. How does that benefit you to have Vladimir Putin here on American soil in the White House right before you have an election where the Russia issue, of course, it's not the economy, it's not healthcare, but it certainly does matter. And to Kat's point about the clarification, the problem with it is not the 27 hours. The problem with it is that it's a lie. President Trump speaks English. He knows the difference between would and wouldn't. He doesn't think...
Wait, on what basis are you declaring that he's lying when he says he didn't mean to say what he said?
The number of times that he has said before, and I know there are 7 times where he accepted that Russia meddled in this election, but he has overwhelmingly come down on the side of Trump. Before you,
speaking of clarifications, so Coates then puts out this statement, Dan Coates, some press coverage is mischaracterized. I in no way meant to be disrespectful or criticize the president. I'll let you make your point, but I do want to ask you about some of these leaks, because self-serving leaks, people from behind a curtain of anonymity saying things like to the Washington Post, well, we gave him 100 pages of briefing to be tough on Putin, but he largely ignored it. Axios, quoting a former senior White House official, need a shower. Axios, quoting a former national security official, dude, this is a total blanking disgrace. The president has lost his mind. Should the press be letting people say that without their names attached?
Howard, you and I have a very comfortable position here as members of the American press, where we expect that we are allowed to say or report what we want. In fact, it's our actual duty. But when the president's inner circle are some of the people dropping the dime on the president, do you hide that? Do you choose to hide that? I can't tell people how often we've gotten calls and dimes dropped by the inner circle. This is coming from people who, if we told you who they were, you'd be surprised. They are very close and supportive of the president. But it goes back to sort of this confusion and these Cirque du Soleil, backflips to try by the president to misstate. Now, people make mistakes, and people are allowed to misspeak. They absolutely are. But why is it so difficult every time he's either talking about one person, Vladimir Putin, or standing next to Vladimir Putin, that he suddenly can't do the Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall?
Well, he's a very different
president.
president.
After that said, I'm not sure what Reagan really meant.
Right.
Well, also, I just want to say that I'm not saying the press shouldn't report these leaks. I'm just saying these are awfully cheap shots by people who are supposed to be on his side. Let me play for you something that became a huge story and involved one word. ABC's Cecilia Vega asking the president a question that was called a pool spray. Take a listen.
Mr. President, is Russia still targeting the U.S.? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press, let's go. Make your way out.
No, you don't believe that to be the case?
So Sarah Huckabee Sanders later said he wasn't saying no to the question. He was saying, no, I'm not taking any questions at this meeting. But, for example, Washington Post lead story the next day. Trump suggests Russia no longer targeting U.S. Second line in smaller type. White House words were misconstrued.
I think that the media coverage of this might have been a little bit overblown, honestly, because when I watched that video, you know, you need to have the subtitles on it. It's very hard to hear. It does look to me like he could have been just saying no. He was saying no, no, no repeatedly. Yeah. He could have simply been saying no to answering questions. Of course, someplace like the Washington Post is going to jump on that and saying he's taking Russia's side again, especially given, given what the news cycle.
That was just one headline.
Right. Oh, of course. Given what the news cycle was, at that time, of course, everyone's going to jump on that.
I just thought it was ambiguous, but everybody else seemed to just sort of blow it up. I have a tweet for you, Jessica. Let's put this up on the screen. There were many. We picked this one. The fake news media wants so badly to see a major confrontation with Russia, even a confrontation that could lead to war. They're pushing so recklessly hard and hate the fact that I'll probably have a good relationship with Putin, even a confrontation that could lead to war. I mean, the media like fighting and fistfights and bloody noses, but
they don't want
nuclear war,
that.
not so much.
Definitely not so much. And you see that with the North Korea coverage as well, and how everyone, I think, actually has been giving him his due credit for making progress, but also saying we need to be careful about this. And as the reports continue to roll out about what's really going on in North Korea, that was certainly warranted. He's over the top here, and we even have had our own John Roberts push back and say, am I the fake news media now? Right. Am I the enemy of the people? And that's what this kind of rhetoric does in the end. And
Just look at his policy, Howie. His policy versus his behavior, two totally different things.
Interesting
He has
distinction.
been toughest when it comes to sanctions. He has been unbelievably strong. Well, I could call it minutiae from the Treasury Secretary's standpoint, but these sanctions have really hurt Russia.
Right, a real gap between the policies and often the rhetoric, the tweets, and so forth. I got to get a break, but I do want to put up the New Yorker cover for this week. Just take a look at this. All these magazines, that's him on the escalator, seem to be finding new ways of killing off the president. They do it almost every week. Ahead, Sean Spicer on his former boss dealing with the fallout from Helsinki and some striking admissions about his tenure in the White House. But when we come back, Michael Cohen secretly taping his former boss, Donald Trump, about a former Playboy model. Is that the media bombshell or not so much? There was a massive media explosion when the New York Times disclosed that Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, was secretly taping him, including a discussion of a possible payment to Karen McDougal, the former Playboy model who told CNN she had an affair 12 years ago with Trump and that her story was bought and then killed by the National Enquirer. One of the Times reporters, Maggie Haberman, said this.
It does raise questions as to why it is that the Trump campaign in October 2016, when the Wall Street Journal asked about these payments, asked about AMI and Karen McDougal, were told by the campaign, we know nothing about this. The president obviously did know something about it a month earlier.
There was virtually wall-to-wall cable news coverage of this as soon as that New York Times story hit. Does this story deserve that kind of heavy coverage?
Well, it kind of has everything, right? It has sex, it has deceit, it has
tapes.
The tapes.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that it got so much coverage, but I don't know if it's really going to change anyone's mind. I actually think that most people do believe that Donald Trump cheated on his wife. I don't think that
I think most people don't care.
They don't care, exactly.
Right.
I think the people that support the president, they see this as, you know, the fake news media being mean or trying to create problems. They look and they say that they like what the president is doing in this country, and they don't really care about these kinds of stories.
And what Rudy Giuliani, in confirming the story, said, Jessica, was that this was a possible payment, it ultimately didn't happen, to reimburse the National Enquirer, run by Trump's pal David Pecker, for buying McDougal's story and killing it for $150,000. And Rudy says Trump did nothing wrong. The problem is that at the end of the campaign, you had Hope Hicks telling the Wall Street Journal that Trump didn't know about anything involving Karen McDougal.
That's also how the Stormy Daniels story went from the beginning, where Trump denied that he knew about that, and then eventually he had to back down off of it. And Rudy even said on TV there might be more to come.
Oh, huh? So
it's a familiar pattern. Kat is absolutely correct. The infidelity of this president is baked in. We all heard the Access Hollywood tape, and 62-odd million people still said, okay, this seems like a good guy. I'm going to vote for him. And that's their business. And you got Neil Gorsuch. I think it did deserve the coverage because Michael Cohen's plot line here is important. Obviously, this is about the Michael Cohen investigation, which is New York-based, and it has to do with taxi medallion businesses and all of that. But he is the keeper of many of Donald Trump's secrets. And if there are more tapes, that matters, and if it was campaign finance violation. I mean, that's where this could legally be a problem for the president if they were using campaign funds.
Let me share some of my reporting on this, because Michael Cohen and his team are convinced that this tape, the existence of the tape, was preemptively leaked by the Trump side. A lot of journalists believe that as well, to kind of take the sting out of it, to reduce Cohen's value as a witness to Robert Mueller. And it does make Cohen look bad, secretly taping his boss at the time. But it is also clear that Cohen is trying to work his way through two challenges to figure out how and whether to cooperate with Mueller, perhaps reach some kind of deal. And at the same time, as he's distanced himself from the president in at least one interview, to own up to some of the things he did that maybe he's not proud of when he was working for Donald Trump, to say that he's now president and that he takes a different view of this, and get that behind him. But let me put up for you, Liz, a tweet. You could expect that the next day the president would tweet about this. And the key thing is this second sentence where the president says, inconceivable that a lawyer would tape a client, totally unheard of and perhaps illegal. The good news is that your favorite president did nothing wrong.
Number one, not illegal in the state of New York. Right. It's a one-party audio tape system or rule where only one person has to know. I know in Massachusetts, where I worked in Boston at a television station, two-party at the time that I was there. So both sides had to know. But this can be actually explained in certain cases when you look at the law, and Judge Napolitano would probably say the same thing, that it's almost like taking notes. But what's more interesting, I think, is that both sides are leaking or revealing things to different members of the media to advance their side. And the media is being used in many cases. However, once you get it, is it your representation? Is it important for you to then reveal it? Well, of course, if you have it, you want to give it out there. But the question now becomes, Rudy Giuliani saying that it's exculpatory. That's a little surprising.
That's an opinion. That is spin.
Exactly.
Lanny Davis tweeting that Trump's tweet was false. That's also an opinion of an advocate. But at the same time, as you say, Michael Cohen's an important player here, and it does seem like this is sort of playing out with a lot of leaks. And I think, look, New York Times story was accurate, but what it means is open to media debate.
Right, absolutely. And going back to that tweet, I think that it would be better off if President Trump would just not talk about this stuff at all, because the media loves this story, and the more he tweets about it, the more that the media is going to keep covering it. And so this isn't over yet. I think that we're going to see more and more of this kind of coverage.
Same thing with Stormy, and I get a lot of reaction online, like, you clowns in the press, who cares? He was a celebrity businessman at the time. But again, it ultimately goes to veracity because of the past denials, and that, I think, is a political problem for the president.
It is, but again, it should be. If it was anybody else, I mean, certainly if it was President Obama or President Bush, this would be a huge problem. It happens to not be with this president. And to Kat's point,
it was a problem with President Clinton. I just got about 20 seconds.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yes, President Clinton did get in trouble. I just mean that when they were elected, there was no Access Hollywood tape when President Clinton got elected. I want to say about this story, though, yes, the media loves it, but the Russia story is a lot more important. And I have seen some media criticism this week that I think is smart about losing interest in the Helsinki plot line for the Playboy line, because the Playboy line matters a lot less to voters in the end because it's baked in.
But it is, quote, sexier. And on that note,
it is by definition sexier.
Jessica Tarlov, Kat Timpf, Liz Claman, great to see you all here in New York.
Come to New York more.
Ahead, Sean Spicer on the media environment and what he got wrong and right as press secretary. But up next on Media Buzz from New York, one Fox anchor who spoke her mind about what happened in Helsinki. Trish Regan is here.